Welcome to a place where nightmares don't stay in dreams, but crawl beneath the skin. This is The Swelling, a slow, atmospheric horror designed to keep you listening long after the lights go out. If you're new here, subscribe now, join our circle of night listeners, and never miss the next chapter. Settle in, close your eyes, and let the story begin. The delivery truck pulled up just after dawn, its diesel cough rolling down the empty street like a warning. Evan rubbed his arms against the morning chill as he waited at the back door of Halverson's butcher shop. His breath steamed. A gull screamed overhead. Then the rear doors swung open, and the driver hauled out a rack of burlap-covered crates, stacked like coffins. Evan and the driver wrestled the first crate inside. The wood was damp and cold, leaching through his gloves. When he set it down on the stainless steel counter, the box rattled faintly, as though something inside had shifted. The burlap stank, an earthy, sweet-sour tang, sharper than the usual blood and fat reek of raw pork. "You all right?" the driver asked, catching Evan staring. "Yeah," Evan muttered. He signed the delivery slip, then pulled the box toward him. He slit the burlap. Inside, resting on chipped ice, were pig heads. 6 of them, grey-pink and waxy. Their eyes collapsed inward like the sockets of drowned men. Their ears were curled stiff against their skulls, as though they'd been frozen in pain. But what caught his attention wasn't the faces. It was the swelling. The cheeks bulged grotesquely, puffed and distorted, as if each head were trying to push out another shape from within. The flesh stretched shiny, like sausage casings about to split. He leaned closer, the sour reek tightening his stomach. One head had split open just beneath the eye. From the gap, something pale peeked through, soft and moving. Evan swore and backed away. Halverson lumbered in, wiping his hands on his apron. He was 60, barrel-chested, with a beard that had gone the colour of smoke. "What's the trouble?" Evan pointed. Halverson bent over the crate, squinting. His hand hovered above the swelling, but didn't touch. "Christ almighty," he said softly. He prodded the flesh with a boning knife. The split widened, releasing a faint heat into the room. A tangle of pale filaments writhed within the cheek, slick as threads of boiled noodle. They weren't maggots. Maggots had a rhythm, a clumping pulse. These things rippled independently, like tiny worms threading through pulp. Halvorsen dropped the knife with a clatter. "Not right," he muttered. "Not bloody right." They set the other crates on the counter, prying them open one by one. Each box told the same story. Pig heads with cheeks stretched and warm, as though swollen with breath. Some bulges twitched. One head gave off a faint tremor like a muscle flexing in sleep. Evan wiped sweat from his temple, though the cold room was near freezing. "Do we send them back?" Halverson's eyes stayed on the twitching cheek. "Can't sell this." He made a call to the supplier while Evan cleaned tools in silence. His voice carried from the office, low but agitated. "No, this isn't freezer burn. No, it's not abscess either. I'm telling you, the meat's moving." When he returned, his face was pale. They said inspect them further. Take notes. Maybe it's contamination. "That's contamination?" Evan asked. Halverson ignored the question. He put on fresh gloves, pulled a head onto the cutting block and steadied it with both hands. The swollen cheek trembled beneath his grip. With one clean stroke, he split the flesh. The warmth was stronger now, startling in the cold room. It fogged his glasses. The worms inside writhed in sudden frenzy, spilling onto the block with a wet slap. They were thin, translucent, and long enough to coil like thread around his fingers. No mouth, no eyes, just living filaments. Halverson dropped the head back into the crate, panting. "Get the salt," he ordered. Evan dumped a box of coarse salt across the block. The worms recoiled, shivering as if burned, and slid back into the meat, vanishing into the swollen pulp. The cheek sagged inward, as if deflated. Halvorsen crossed himself without realizing. For the rest of the morning they worked around the crates, too unsettled to throw them out, too frightened to touch them again. Customers came in and out, buying cuts of beef, sausages, chops. Evan smiled, bagged the orders, wiped down the counters. But every time the cold room door opened, the warm, sweet stink leaked out, crawling into his lungs. At lunch, Halverson phoned the council's food safety office. His tone was measured, professional. "Yes, possibly parasitic infestation. No, not like trichinae, more like larvae of some kind, but not insect. Not worm as I know worm." The official promised to send a pathologist by tomorrow. In the meantime, the heads were to be kept in cold storage, sealed, untouched. That night, Evan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He could still feel the warmth radiating from the split cheek. He could still hear the faint ripple of those worms retreating into the meat. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. He touched his own cheek absent-mindedly. His skin felt tight, though that might have been his imagination. He pressed beneath his eye socket and felt a sudden rush of heat deep in his sinuses. He withdrew his hand quickly. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was shallow and broken, filled with the sound of crates rattling in the dark and the quiet, ceaseless shifting of something that should not move. Evan woke with a sour taste in his mouth, as if the night had curdled inside him. He lay still for a long while, the curtains pulled tight against a weak, overcast dawn. The pillow, pressed against his cheek, felt warmer than it should. A dull ache hovered just beneath his left eye, a reminder of the swelling he had touched the night before. He told himself it was nothing, a poor night's sleep, a knot in the muscle, but still he lingered, dreading the day. The shop would open as always, and the faces of the town would come through the door. It was the faces, he realized with an unexpected chill, that unsettled him most. Not the pig heads in the freezer, not even the pale threads the pathologist had discovered, but faces. Faces like his own, soft and fragile, ripe for change. He washed quickly, shaved and dressed. His reflection in the mirror looked pale, but he resisted the urge to prod at his cheek. Best not to give form to his worry. Halvorsen was already fussing with the display when Evan arrived. The older man's temper seemed tighter than usual, though he tried to mask it behind brisk orders. "Stack the sausages neat. Don't leave gaps. Customers don't like to see emptiness." Evan obeyed, keeping his movements steady. The first customers trickled in soon after, rain-damp coats and cold hands. Mrs. Kearney, who bought lamb chops every Thursday, coughed into her scarf and asked for her usual. Her cheeks were puffier than Evan remembered. He noticed it at once, the way the skin sat high beneath her eyes, as if something inside had pressed outward. She rubbed at her temple when he handed her the paper-wrapped meat. "Head cold," she muttered, embarrassed. "Everyone's got it." Evan nodded, his stomach turning. More customers followed, and more faces. A young mother with flushed cheeks and a fretful baby. An old man whose lower lip seemed swollen, the words slurring as he spoke. Even Halvorsen himself paused at one point to rub his jaw, muttering about a bad tooth. Evan felt as though he were watching a slow tide rise, silent but undeniable. The town was swelling, one face at a time. At noon, Halvorsen sent him out for change and bread rolls. The rain had stopped, leaving the cobblestones slick. The market square was busier than usual, stalls selling vegetables, clothes, second-hand books. Voices carried beneath the cloudy sky, though the laughter that usually laced the crowd felt muted. Evan paused near the fruit stand. A boy no older than 12 tugged at his mother's sleeve, his cheeks unnaturally puffy, as if stuffed with cotton. The mother scolded him for dawdling, her own face red and tight at the jaw. Everywhere Evan looked, he saw it. A woman with one swollen eyelid. A man with bulging cheeks, trying to chew an apple in small, painful bites. The illusion of normalcy held. People bartered and talked, but beneath it all ran a current of unease. At the far end of the square, a commotion broke out. A man in a raincoat staggered against a stall, clutching his face. Evan edged closer, drawn by the murmurs. The man's left eye bulged grotesquely, the skin around it stretched to translucence. He gasped, and in that moment Evan saw something move, thin, pale, like a thread of vermicelli, pressing against the inner corner of the man's eye. The man shrieked. People pulled back, horrified, as paramedics rushed in. They pinned him gently, trying to keep him still, while one of them dabbed at his streaming eye with gauze. Evan caught a glimpse of a milky filament clinging to the cloth before it was folded away. The crowd scattered after that, fear breaking the spell of ordinary commerce. Stalls closed, baskets were abandoned. Evan gripped the roll of coins in his pocket until they bit into his palm. He returned to the shop shaken, but Halvorsen only scowled. "What kept you?" "Someone collapsed," Evan said, his voice low. "In the square. Something came out of his eye." Halvorsen froze, then turned back to his counter without a word. The rest of the afternoon passed in uneasy silence. It was nearly closing time when the phone rang. Halverson answered, his voice clipped, then handed the receiver to Evan with a look that betrayed more worry than words could. "This is Dr. Patel," said the voice on the line. Calm, measured, the kind of tone doctors use when they don't want to alarm you. "I understand you were present when the contaminated pig heads were discovered." Evan swallowed. "Yes, with Mr. Halverson. We're analysing the samples you sent. Preliminary results suggest an unidentified organism. It doesn't match any common parasites. We need to ask, have you experienced any unusual symptoms?" Evan hesitated. The ache in his cheek pulsed like a secret. "No," he said finally. "Good. Please be vigilant. If you or Mr. Halverson notice swelling, tenderness, or discharge, contact us immediately. The situation in town is developing." The line clicked dead before Evan could reply. They closed the shop early. Halverson claimed it was the weather, but both men knew the truth. Outside, the streets were subdued, curtains drawn earlier than usual, shop fronts dark. Evan walked home with the weight of the call pressing on him. At the corner, he passed Mrs. Kearney again. She was leaning against a lamp-post, handkerchief pressed to her cheek. When she lowered it, he glimpsed a faint glisten, something pale against the skin before she dabbed it away. She caught him staring and turned quickly, shame or fear propelling her steps. At his flat, Evan locked the door and sat at the kitchen table without turning on the light. He listened to the pipes creak, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and beneath it all, the steady throb in his cheek. He lifted a hand but forced it back down. To touch would be to acknowledge. Instead, he stared at the dark window, watching his reflection stare back. His face looked normal enough, but in the blackness of the glass he thought he saw it move, the cheek rising and falling, as though something beneath the skin had shifted, seeking its way out. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly, as if stillness could hold the horror at bay. The town had caught something it did not understand. A swelling that was not fever, not cold, not ordinary sickness. Faces were changing, and the market square had shown the truth for all to see. Evan told himself he would return to work in the morning, because what else was there to do? But deep inside, in the warmth of his own swelling, he knew the tide was coming for him too. Evan woke in the grey half-light of morning with the sensation that something had been pressing on him all night. His pillow was damp where his cheek had rested, and when he touched his face he felt that same low-grade heat beneath the skin. He didn't linger on it. Habit carried him through the motions. Wash, dress, walk to the shop. The air outside smelled sour, as though the town itself was sweating. Halverson was already at the counter, flipping through a folded newspaper with a grim expression. He pushed it across the counter when Evan entered. The headline was short and cold: "Mystery illness under investigation." Beneath it, a few sentences described localized facial swelling in residents and mentioned that one man had collapsed in the square. Officials say there is no cause for alarm. Halverson snorted. That's their line every time. No cause for alarm until the coffins stack. He folded the paper shut and set about sharpening his knives with exaggerated force. The rhythmic scraping filled the silence between them. Customers trickled in, and it was impossible not to notice the changes. Mrs. Kearney again, her cheek more distended than yesterday, as if something were puffing her from the inside. She accepted her parcel of lamb without meeting Evan's eyes. A delivery boy came in later, one side of his face mottled and swollen so badly he had trouble forming words. He set the crate down and hurried away, embarrassed. Between customers, Halverson muttered, "It's moving fast, faster than they'll admit." He rubbed his own jaw, and Evan saw his hand tremble. By noon, the ache in Evan's cheek had deepened to a pressure that reminded him of being underwater. He tried not to touch it, but every expression pulled against the tension there. He kept glancing at the shop's front window, half expecting to see his reflection warped and bulbous. The phone rang. Halverson picked it up, then passed it to Evan without a word. "This is Dr. Patel again," came the calm voice. "We need to update you. The organisms we collected from the pig heads and from yesterday's incident in the square appear to be the same. They're warm-bodied, reactive to pressure. They don't resemble any parasite we recognize. For now, we're advising all businesses handling meat to report any unusual findings immediately." Evan asked, "What about the people?" A pause. "We're gathering information. For now, monitor yourself. If your symptoms change, you must come in." Evan almost admitted the truth then, the pressure, the warmth. But something stopped him. He pictured the man in the square with the filament slipping from his eye, the panic of the crowd, and he couldn't bring himself to step forward into that light. "I'm fine," he said, and hated the lie as soon as it left his mouth. That afternoon, a disturbance broke out across the street at the pharmacy. A small group had gathered, demanding medicine, antibiotics, anything that might stem the swellings. The pharmacist stood helpless behind the counter while voices rose, sharp with fear. Evan saw a woman lift her scarf to shout and glimpsed the grotesque bulge along her jawline. It twitched as she spoke, as though something beneath the skin shifted. A shout, the crash of a display stand, and the group spilled into the street. Evan watched through the window as the woman collapsed to her knees. The swell beneath her jaw rippled, then burst. A pale slurry oozed through the skin, strung with threads like wet paper pulp. People screamed. Halverson swore and ran to the door to bolt it. Evan couldn't move, his eyes fixed on the woman as others pulled her away from the pharmacy threshold. She was sobbing, clutching her face, while pale fibres clung to her fingers. The crowd scattered. Sirens wailed, distant but closing fast. Inside the shop, the air was thick with silence. Halverson leaned heavily against the counter. "Pressure and pulp," he muttered, almost to himself. "That's what it is. Nothing holds forever." The phrase stuck with Evan all afternoon. Pressure and pulp. He cut meat mechanically, the wet thud of the cleaver merging with the image of that jaw splitting open. Every sound was magnified. The scrape of knife on bone, the squeak of shoes on tile. Customers came and went in tense silence, many of them with swollen cheeks or eyes, all pretending not to notice each other. By evening, when they closed early again, the streets felt altered. An ambulance idled near the square, red lights flashing against shuttered windows. Groups of neighbours whispered together on corners, glancing around as though the illness might be listening. The ordinary fabric of the town had started to fray. At home, Evan sat in his dim kitchen with a glass of water untouched before him. The pressure in his cheek pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He leaned forward, staring at his reflection in the darkened window. He thought of pressing a finger into the swelling, of seeing if something would give way. The urge was almost unbearable. He resisted, barely. Instead, he sat motionless until long after midnight, listening to the night outside, sirens in the distance, the bark of a dog cut short, then silence. A silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls, like the town itself was holding its breath. When he finally lay down, he dreamed not of faces or worms, but of fruit. He saw an apple, perfect and round, swelling until its skin split to reveal wet white pulp that writhed with unseen life. He woke gasping, the image etched behind his eyes, and touched his cheek. Still intact, still holding, but the pressure was worse. The town did not settle after the pharmacy incident. It turned into a hinge moment, the sort of day people would refer to afterward in whispers, before the woman's jaw burst and after. By morning, the square had been hosed clean, but rumours carried faster than water. People traded stories of fibres clinging to her hands, of threads in her saliva, of a scream that had gone on long after she was carried into the ambulance. The official line was that it had been a seizure compounded by infection, but no one believed it. The council vans still patrolled, and that told its own story. At Halverson's shop, the air felt heavy. Customers came in wrapped in scarves, even though the weather was mild, as if concealing the swelling might hold it at bay. Evan noticed more of them speaking softly, one hand hovering near their cheeks as if they could guard against betrayal. A man who normally joked with Halverson asked only for broth bones, eyes fixed on the floor. The work itself seemed unchanged. Knives, cutting boards, meat stacked in tidy parcels, but beneath every ordinary action lay dread. Evan kept seeing the fibres from the woman's jaw in his mind, pale threads tangled in her sobbing fingers. He had not slept well. The pressure in his own cheek was constant now, sometimes flaring into a hot stab that made his vision blur. He tried to ignore it, but he caught himself massaging the skin when no one was watching. Halverson seemed to be fading in his own way. His eyes were red, his temper short. When Evan asked if he was sleeping, the old butcher muttered something about dreams he couldn't shake, of swollen carcasses split open with pulp spilling out. He said it in a flat tone, as if the words themselves had already drained him. By afternoon, a patrol car idled near the square. A council official in a reflective jacket walked door to door with a clipboard, leaving printed notices that requested voluntary health checks. People took them with stiff smiles, then shut their doors quickly. One woman across the street tore hers into strips before it even touched her kitchen counter. Evan stepped outside to sweep the pavement, needing air, but the sight of the square made him pause. A boy sat slumped on a bench, his face turned away. Another boy stood near him, pointing and laughing until his mother yanked him away. Evan saw why. The seated boy's ear had swollen to twice its size, the lobe hanging like a pendulum. He pressed it with both hands, rocking slightly. Evan's broom clattered to the ground. Later that same day, as the shop quieted, Evan went into the cold room to rearrange stock. The hanging pig heads still waited on their hooks, some swollen, some not, their dull eyes clouded with frost. He touched one cheek almost without thinking. It gave beneath his fingers like overripe fruit. A faint heat bled into his skin. He snatched his hand back, heart thudding. Even through the cold storage air, he had felt warmth. When he returned to the counter, Halvorsen was slumped on his stool with his face in his hands. "I can't do this much longer," he muttered. "It's in the air, in the walls. I smell it everywhere." His knuckles were pale where they pressed against his temples. That evening, Evan's phone rang. Dr. Patel again. Her voice was low, tired. "The samples we're studying divide rapidly under pressure, almost like fruit cells. They absorb fluids, swell, then release filaments when ruptured. It's incubation of some kind, but we don't yet know what they're incubating." Evan pressed the phone so tightly his ear hurt. "Is there treatment?" "Not yet," she said. "You must monitor any changes. And Evan, avoid pressing on any swelling, even lightly. It seems to hasten. Release." The words stuck to him long after the call ended. Release. He sat in the dark of his kitchen, one hand trembling inches from his cheek, aching with the urge to squeeze and be done with it. He forced himself to lower his hand and sit on it until the feeling passed. That night he walked to the square, unable to stay inside. Streetlights pooled weak yellow across empty benches. The boy with the swollen ear was gone, but in his place was a smear of dried fluid along the wood. The sight made Evan sway with nausea. From somewhere in the distance came a sound, an odd, papery rustle like wind through leaves though the night was still. He turned, straining to pinpoint it, but it faded before he could. Over the next days the illness thickened around town. At the market, vendors whispered of customers whose faces ballooned overnight. The bakery closed when the owner's lips swelled until he could no longer form words. 2 children were sent home from school after pale threads appeared in their spit during lessons. Ambulances became common background noise. Halvorsen shut the shop twice in 1 week, citing headaches. Evan kept it running alone, though every moment behind the counter felt like waiting for something to rupture. He noticed how people looked at one another now, eyes flicking not to smiles or hands, but to the curves of their cheeks, the puff of skin around their eyes, the line of their lips. Conversation had collapsed into furtive glances. One morning a man came in for liver. As Evan wrapped it, he realized the man's eye was bulging, the white threaded with faint pale lines that shifted when he blinked. Evan dropped the parcel. The man said nothing, simply picked it up from the counter and left. Evan stood trembling, unable to breathe until the door shut. That night, fevered, he dreamed of a room filled with fruit suspended from hooks, each swelling larger, skins translucent. Inside each one writhed threads that thickened and knotted. He woke with the taste of pulp in his mouth, choking, and stumbled to the sink to spit. The water ran cloudy. The next day, a siren cut through the market square. People clustered near the council van as an official read from a megaphone. "This is a precautionary message. Facial swelling must be reported immediately. Do not attempt to pierce or compress affected areas." The words rolled over the crowd, but Evan could see how many stood with scarves, how many kept their heads down. It was already too late. They were all incubating something. At the shop that evening, Halvorsen did not come in at all. Evan closed early, walked home through streets lit by warning posters taped to every lamp post. His face throbbed with each step, a heavy drumbeat under his skin. He imagined threads winding through his flesh, waiting for the right pressure to split him open. Inside his flat, he turned off the lights and sat on the floor, back to the wall, palms pressed to his knees to stop them from shaking. Outside, in the hush between sirens, he heard it again, the papery rustle. Not wind, not leaves. A sound of many thin things shifting together. A sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. He pressed his fist against his mouth to keep from crying out, and waited in the dark until the sound ebbed. His cheek burned with heat. He wondered how much longer he could contain what was growing there. The first sirens came before dawn. Evan lay in bed half asleep, cheek burning, and at first thought they were woven into a dream. But when he opened his eyes, the ceiling glowed red with pulsing light from the street. He pushed himself upright and felt the skin on his face pull tight, hot and distended, as though something had swollen behind it overnight. He staggered to the window. An ambulance blocked the corner, its rear doors hanging open. Figures in pale masks moved quickly, lifting a man out of a doorway on a stretcher. His head lolled sideways, face swollen grotesquely round. As the stretcher tilted, something wet splashed onto the pavement. Evan thought he saw a pale filament dangling from the man's mouth before the medics shoved him into the van and slammed the doors. The street below was filling with people, many with scarves wrapped high over their faces, others clutching their jaws or temples. No one spoke. They stared at one another's cheeks the way farmers look at fruit for signs of rot. Another siren cut in from the far side of town, then another. The sound layered until the whole valley vibrated with alarm. Evan dressed slowly, fighting dizziness. The swelling in his cheek had spread down into his neck. He could feel something shifting when he swallowed. In the bathroom mirror, the skin bulged as if packed from within. A purple flush mottled the surface. He pressed one trembling finger against it. Heat surged into his hand. Beneath, there was movement, delicate, sinuous, alive. He jerked back with a gasp, gripping the sink until the wave of nausea passed. He should have hidden indoors. He should have locked the door and waited. But the air inside pressed on him like a weight, and the silence between sirens was unbearable. He needed to see, to know. He grabbed his coat and stepped into the street. The town had transformed overnight. Posters plastered the lampposts, black block letters reading reports, symptoms immediately. Vans idled at corners, masked officials unloading stretchers. The bakery was shuttered, the pharmacy windows boarded. Outside the post office, a crowd had gathered around a woman on her knees. Her face was twice its size, eyes almost buried, and her lips stretched until they tore. When she screamed, threads of pale wetness fluttered from the wound, swaying like the legs of some blind insect. The crowd stumbled back, and two medics surged forward with a tarp. But the woman collapsed before they reached her, convulsing as her cheek split open in a burst of fluid and writhing threads. People shrieked, scattering. The medics tried to cover her, but the fibres coiled and whipped, clinging to gloves and sleeves until they cut them away. Evan staggered to a wall, hand pressed to his burning cheek. The pressure inside him mounted with each scream around the square. A child ran past with a bulging eye, his father dragging him toward the van. Across the street, a man leaned against a lamppost, blood running from his ear where something twitched inside. Everywhere people pressed scarves to their faces, moaning through cloth. He turned instinctively toward Halvorson's shop. The door hung ajar. Inside, the smell of meat was stronger than ever, a rancid heat that turned his stomach. Halvorson sat on his stool behind the counter, but his head was bowed and one hand clutched his face. Evan hurried forward, calling his name. The butcher lifted his head slowly, and Evan's chest tightened at the sight. One side of Halvorson's face had collapsed inward, while the other bulged grotesquely outward. His eye was swollen shut, and from the cracked corner of his mouth a thread dangled, twitching as if seeking purchase in the air. "Don't!" Halvorson croaked, voice muffled. He raised a trembling hand, palm out. "It's already. Inside. Don't come closer." Evan froze. The sound of commotion outside pressed against the walls, shouts and sirens, and the wet, tearing cries of others rupturing. Halvorson tried to rise, but collapsed forward across the counter. His swollen cheek split with the impact. Evan saw the skin peel, fluid gush, and from within burst a mass of pale worms, writhing and curling in the butcher's beard. They poured out in a slick rope, slapping the counter, squirming toward the floor. Halverson gave one long shudder and was still. Evan stumbled back, his vision tilting. The shop spun around him. His cheek throbbed with unbearable pressure, each pulse threatening to rip him open. He bolted out the door into chaos. The square had become a scene from a nightmare. People dropped in the street, their faces splitting as threads spilled outward in wet ribbons. Some burst from eyes, others from jaws, some even from the thin skin behind ears. The worms twisted together in heaving knots that pulsed with uncanny rhythm, a collective muscle learning to move. Medics retreated, abandoning stretchers. Someone screamed for fire, and bottles smashed as flames licked at the edge of the square, smoke rising. The air reeked of rot and bile. Evan fell against a wall, clawing at his face. The heat was unbearable. He could feel the thing inside pressing upwards, stretching his skin thin. Threads rubbed against bone, searching for exit. In blind panic, he staggered toward the council van where Dr. Patel stood in mask and gloves, shouting into a radio. She saw him and waved frantically. "Don't touch it," she screamed. "If you compress." But the pressure broke him. With a sob, he dug his nails into his cheek, squeezing, needing release. The skin gave way in a sudden rip. Hot fluid sprayed down his shirt. He screamed as pale filaments burst outward, writhing across his hands, slapping against the wall. They clung to his skin with tiny hooks, coiling tighter. He fell to his knees, gagging as another surge rose from deep inside. His vision blurred white. Through the haze, he saw Patel rushing forward with two masked figures, tarps and poles extended. They pinned him down, wrapping the tarp across his face, binding the threads against his skin. He choked on the stench, struggling. In the muffled dark, he heard Patel's voice close to his ear. "It's not just infection," she whispered fiercely. "It's gestation. You're hosts. You were always hosts." The words sank through him as his body convulsed. Inside, more threads shifted, climbing his throat, filling his sinuses with pressure until his skull rang with it. He gagged, coughed, and a wet coil forced itself between his lips, writhing in the tarp. He screamed until his throat tore. Then came silence. When the tarp was lifted, Evan lay shuddering on the pavement. The worms that had erupted from him twitched feebly, their sheen fading as if starved of something they needed. Around the square, other bodies convulsed, faces split, streets littered with pale pulp. The medics dragged survivors into vans, leaving the dead tangled in their own spawn. Fires guttered at the edges, smoke blackening the sky. Evan drifted in and out. Once he opened his eyes and saw Patel standing over him, mask spattered, eyes rimmed red. She shook her head slowly. "It isn't over. This is only hatching. They'll find another stage." He tried to speak, but only fluid bubbled in his throat. She touched his shoulder, then turned away, shouting orders to others. As night fell, Evan lay on the cold pavement of the ruined square, cheek split and leaking, body emptied, yet still alive. Around him, the town groaned with the sound of many small things shifting, threads dragging across stone, seeking. He stared upward at the smoke-stained sky until his vision dimmed. In the silence before unconsciousness claimed him, he felt one last stirring deep inside his chest. Something left behind, not yet ready, biding its time. You've just heard another chapter of The Swelling, a story that grows darker each night. If you want to stay with us, let the next chapter play, or subscribe now, so you never miss when the horror spreads. Thank you for listening in the dark. Until next time, sleep lightly.